somewhere in a museum drawer, under a light that is almost never turned on, there is a small piece of clay that may be older than history. It is not beautiful in the way a crown is beautiful. It is not gold. It does not glitter. It is brown, chipped, palm-sized, and quiet. Its surface is crowded with marks made by a hand that has been dust for 5,000 years. Some of the marks look like wedges, some look like scratches, some look almost like a picture that has forgotten what it used to be. And here is the unsettling thing. It is writing, or it is standing at the doorway of writing, but in many cases we still cannot fully read it. Not because no one has tried. Whole lives have been spent at tables like this one, leaning over clay, photographing shadows, comparing signs, counting repeated patterns, asking what a mark means when the mouth that spoke it has been silent since the first cities. We're young. We can read some of the old world now. We can hear kings, we can hear merchants, we can hear temple accounts, laws, prayers, school exercises, laments. But around those readable islands there is still a dark sea. Proto-Elamite, the Indus script, Linear A, early marks from the edge of Sumer, names that may not be names, numbers that may not count what we think they count, systems that were made by intelligent people, used in real places, and then left behind like locked doors with no surviving key. Tonight we are not chasing aliens, lost superscience, or a single magic tablet that explains everything. The real mystery is colder and better than that. The first writing on Earth may point toward a world we still do not understand, not because it was impossible, but because it was ordinary to the people who made it, ordinary enough that they did not explain it, ordinary enough that when their cities fell, the key went with them. So settle in. The drawer is open. The clay is waiting. Before writing, the world was not silent. It was crowded with memory. People remembered where water gathered after the dry months. They remembered which plants made a fever break and which plants should never be touched. They remembered the faces of kin, the paths of herds, the names of dangerous places, the old stories that explained why a hill was sacred, or why a river bent where it did. Human beings carried libraries in their bodies long before they built shells. But memory has a weakness. It lives inside people. A song can travel for generations, but only if someone keeps singing it. A boundary can be known for centuries, but only if the community continues to walk it, argue over it, and teach it to children. But remembering a debt is not the same as proving it when the argument becomes hard. For a long time, human societies did not need writing. Small groups could hold the necessary world in memory, ritual, and speech. They could scratch, paint, carve, and count without building anything like a script. Cave art was not writing in the strict sense, but it proves that the human mind had already learned to leave meaning outside the body. A painted bison was not just pigment, it was memory fixed to stone. A line of notches in bone may not tell us a sentence, but it tells us somebody wanted a sequence to remain after the moment passed. Then communities grew heavier. Animals were herded, grain was stored, temples gathered offerings, villages became towns, towns became cities, and the number of things that had to be remembered began to exceed the patience of the human mind. 10 sheep can be remembered, 10,000 sheep become an argument, 1 basket of barley can be watched, a warehouse full of barley needs records. This is where the story becomes humbler than people expect. Writing did not first appear as poetry. It did not begin with a philosopher asking what it means to be alive. It seems to have grown from the pressure of keeping accounts. Before the signs, there were tokens, little clay cones, spheres, discs and shapes used for counting goods. A token could stand for a measure of grain, an animal, a jar of oil. In some places, tokens were sealed inside clay envelopes so the count could travel with the goods. Imagine the problem. A sealed clay envelope protects the tokens inside, but it hides them too. To know what is inside, you have to break the envelope. So people began pressing the token shapes into the outside before sealing them within. The mark became a shadow of the object. At some point, the shadow was enough. Why carry the token at all, if the mark could do the work? This is not the whole origin of writing, and scholars still debate the steps. But it gives us the texture of the beginning. Writing was born from clay, pressure, trust, and the need to make memory portable. It was a technology of absence. It let a fact remain when the speaker left the room. That may sound small, until you feel what it changed. A spoken promise fades as soon as it is made. A written mark waits. It can accuse. It can survive the death of both people in the bargain. It can travel through a gate, across a river, into a storeroom, and out again years later. It can let a city become more complicated than any single person inside it. Before writing had a shape, there was a world pressing toward it. And in the river plains of southern Mesopotamia, that pressure was about to harden into clay. If you wanted to invent writing, you could hardly choose a better material than wet clay. Clay lies beside rivers. It is cheap, soft, and patient. It takes the pressure of a reed stylus, as if it were made to remember. It does not need ink, parchment, metal, or a tree cut down and flattened into paper. Press the sign while it is damp, let it dry, and the record holds. If a fire destroys the building, the fire may bake the tablet harder. Destruction can turn paperwork into archaeology. That is one reason we know so much about southern Mesopotamia, and still so little about other, early worlds. The clay kept receipts. The city most often named in this beginning is Uruk. In the 4th millennium BC, Uruk was not just a settlement. It was an experiment in scale. Its walls, temples, workshops, storage rooms, canals, and crowds belonged to a new kind of human life. More people were living together than older systems of memory could comfortably hold. Food came in, labour went out, offerings were measured, workers were rationed, animals were counted, land had to be allocated, authority had to leave marks behind itself. In the ruins of Uruk and places connected to its world, archaeologists found tablets that look strange to modern eyes. They are not letters in the way we imagine letters. They are small, practical objects, often recording quantities and commodities, signs for things, signs for numbers, signs pressed into clay not to tell a story, but to control a flow. This matters because it makes the first archive feel almost disappointingly familiar. The earliest writing we can study in quantity is not a sacred secret. It is administration. It is the old human problem of who owes what, who received what, and what was placed in whose storehouse. But do not let that make it small. A warehouse account can be more revealing than a royal boast. Kings tell us what they want remembered. Accounts tell us what a society had to manage every morning. Grain, beer, oil, wool, sheep, labour, names, the daily machinery of a city. In the oldest tablets, civilization is not a shining monument. It is a network of obligations pressed into mud. The tablets also show us that writing did not arrive fully formed. Early signs could be flexible, local, and difficult. They were made by people who already understood their system, so they did not need to explain it to us. A sign could stand for an object, a sound, a category, or a remembered convention. The earliest tablets were not written for strangers 5,000 years in the future. They were written for offices, storerooms, and trained eyes inside a living institution. This is why some of the first writing feels so close and so far away at once. We can see the tablets, We can see the pressure of the reed. We can measure its width and photograph every mark. But the social world that made the mark has vanished. We may know that a tablet concerns grain, but not the full meaning of the transaction. We may identify a sign, but not the voice behind it. Uruk gives us the first great lesson of the unread world. Writing is not only a code, it is a habit shared by a community. When the community is gone, even the code can become a ruin. And beyond Uruk, there are older and stranger fragments waiting at the edge of the story. One of them is often called the Kish tablet. The Kish tablet is not a dramatic object. It does not announce itself like a royal inscription carved into stone. It does not unfold into a myth. It is a small limestone tablet, heavily marked, damaged, and debated. It comes from ancient Kish in Mesopotamia, and is often discussed as one of the earliest known. Examples near the beginning of writing. Some descriptions call it proto-cuneiform. Some are more cautious. That caution is important because the beginning of writing is not a single bright line. It is a fog. The temptation is to ask, what does it say? But with objects like this, the better question may be, what kind of world had to exist for this to be made at all? To make a tablet, even an uncertain one, you need more than a hand and a tool. You need a convention. Marks must be recognized by someone other than the maker. A surface must be prepared. A reason must exist for fixing the marks. There must be enough trust in the system that a mark can stand in for speech, memory, or authority. There must be a small community of people who know how the marks behave. That means even the earliest writing-like object is not really a beginning. It is a survivor from a process already underway. This is one of the quiet shocks of archaeology. The first thing we find is rarely the first thing that existed. It is the first thing that survived in a place where we happen to dig. The first boat was probably not the oldest boat ever found. The first woven cloth was almost certainly not the first cloth. The first written tablet we can point to was probably not the moment humanity first decided to store words outside the mouth. The true beginning was likely softer, marks on perishable material, clay tablets that were broken, reused, or never fired, local systems that left almost nothing, training exercises swept away, tags from goods that rotted, burned, or dissolved. The visible archive is only the hardened edge of a much larger vanished practice. So the Kish tablet sits in a strange position. It is famous because it seems early, but its deeper power is that it makes the beginning less simple. It reminds us that writing did not fall from the sky. It thickened gradually out of counting, marking, sealing, naming, and the growing needs of settled life. The signs on early tablets can look almost childish to people used to alphabets, but that is a modern illusion. A simple mark can belong to a very complex system, if everyone inside the system knows what it means. Think of a small mark on a warehouse door, a notch on a tally, a seal on a jar, a stamp on a document. Without the surrounding world, the mark may look empty. Inside the world, it can decide who eats. This is why the earliest writing is both intimate and stubborn. You can see the movement of the hand, but not always the rule in the mind. You can stand so close to the object that the mark fills your whole field of vision, and still remain outside the room in which it made sense. Tonight, that distance is the story. Because after these first experiments, the marks began to change. They became less like pictures, more like signs, less like objects, more like a system. The word cuneiform comes from the shape of the signs. Wedge-shaped, pressed by a reed stylus into clay, a technology of angles. But before the wedges became the dense, disciplined script that later scribes learned in schools, many signs were more pictorial. A head could be suggested, a bowl, a foot, grain, a sheep. Over time the marks were rotated, simplified, repeated and standardized. The hand found faster ways to do the work. The tool encouraged certain shapes. Clay rewarded pressure more than drawing. This is one of the great transformations in the history of thought, a picture becoming a sign, and a sign becoming something that can carry sound. At first, a mark may point toward a thing, then it can point toward a word for the thing. Then the sound of that word can be borrowed to write another word. A system that begins with accounting can grow into a system capable of law, prayer, myth, literature, and grief. It does not happen all at once. It happens because practical people keep solving practical problems until the tool can do more than anyone first asked of it. Cuneiform became one of the most durable writing traditions in human history. It was used for Sumerian, Akkadian, Hittite, and other languages across a huge span of time. It carried royal inscriptions and private letters, mathematical tables and omen texts, school exercises and myths. The same broad technology that began with clay records helped preserve stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh, city laments, treaties, and lists of kings. But the later success can make the beginning look cleaner than it was. Early writing is full of ambiguity. A mark can change over time. A sign can have more than one value. A tablet can be damaged at the place where one clue would have helped. A language can disappear while the script survives. A script can be visible while the words beneath it remain uncertain. Decipherment is not just matching a symbol to a sound, it is rebuilding a lost set of habits. What direction was it read? Where does one word end and another begin? Does the sign represent an object, an idea, a syllable, a number, a person's name, a place, or a professional title? Is the mark standard, local, careless, ancient, or damaged? Does a repeated cluster mean a phrase, a commodity, a formula, or a title? The later scribes of Mesopotamia knew answers that were never written down because they were obvious to them. Obvious things are often the first to vanish. Picture a tablet in a storeroom. To its maker it is plain. The amount, the object, the person responsible, the institution, the date or sequence. Nothing mystical. Nothing secret. A workaday note in the machinery of a city. But when the city dies and the language shifts and the institution disappears, the note becomes strange, not because the maker intended mystery, but because normal life is the hardest thing to reconstruct from outside. That is why the first writing on earth does not simply give us a clear window. It gives us a window with dust on both sides. Through it we can see that people counted, stored, rationed, served, traded, worshipped, and obeyed. We can see the outline of a world, but there are rooms in that world we still cannot enter. And sometimes the rooms are not just difficult, sometimes the whole script remains closed. When people imagine the first writing, they often hope for revelation. A message from before history, a warning from the gods, a secret about a vanished age, something grand enough to justify the age of the object. What we mostly find is grain. Grain, sheep, beer, oil, textiles, workers, measures, lists, allotments and names. The great first archive is full of ordinary pressure. Someone had to know what came in. Someone had to know what went out. Someone had to know how much was owed, counted, stored, consumed or offered. The earliest written world is not a library of cosmic answers. It is an office that learned to survive death. That can sound disappointing only if we forget what food means. Grain is not just grain when a city depends on it. It is labour in another form. It is tax, ration, sacrifice, wage, emergency reserve, temple wealth, political power, and winter survival. A tablet listing barley may look dull until you imagine the people whose meals depended on the count being accepted. A ration list is a social map. It tells you who was inside the system, who had authority, and who received what from whom. The first records show civilization doing its least glamorous work. They show it keeping track. There is a deep human truth in that. People did not invent writing because they suddenly became poetic. They invented it because memory had become dangerous. Too much depended on things being remembered the same way by people with different interests. Clay made memory less negotiable. Later, of course, writing widened. Once a system can record numbers and names, it can be taught to record speech. Once it can record speech, it can carry a prayer. Once it can carry a prayer, it can carry a lament. It can say that a king built a wall. It can say that a city was destroyed. It can say that a friend is worried, that a shipment is late, that a student copied badly, that a god has been offended, that a dream may mean trouble. But the administrative beginning matters because it gives us a different picture of ancient people. They were managers, workers, accountants, brewers, shepherds, porters, priests and scribes. They woke up into obligations, they handled materials, they argued about quantities, they needed receipts. If anything, this makes them feel closer. There is also a warning here for anyone chasing a single hidden message. The early archive is not one message. It is a landscape. Its meaning comes from thousands of small records set beside one another until patterns appear. A lone tablet can tempt us into fantasy because it is isolated. A whole archive disciplines the imagination. It says, look again. These people were not writing to us. They were solving their day. And yet, even when the contents are ordinary, the mystery remains. Because administrative records can name offices we do not understand, commodities we cannot identify, institutions whose rules have vanished. They can preserve titles without job descriptions, names without biographies, numbers without the full measuring system. They can show a world in fragments so precise that the missing pieces hurt more. The clay did its part. It waited. Now the question is whether we can still learn how to listen. To the east of Mesopotamia, another early writing system appears on clay tablets from the ancient land of Elam. We call it Proto-Elamite. The name itself is a confession. Proto because it stands near the beginning of something. Elamite because later Elamite languages and scripts are known from the region. But Proto-Elamite remains one of the great unopened doors. It was used around the late 4th and early 3rd millennium BC, especially in and around Susa and the Iranian plateau. We can identify signs, we can count them, we can classify tablets, we can see numerical systems, repeated patterns and administrative concerns. But the script as a whole is still not deciphered. This is a different feeling from a damaged tablet in a known language. With a damaged tablet, we may know the script and lose the sentence. With Proto-Elamite, the surface itself is visible, and the system remains largely beyond us. It is like standing in front of a wall of doors, and knowing that real rooms are behind them, but not which key belongs where. Why is it so hard? Part of the problem is that we do not have a bilingual key. No equivalent of a Rosetta Stone laying the unknown signs beside a known language in a reliable way. Part of the problem is that the language behind the signs may not be securely identified. Part of the problem is that many tablets are administrative, which means they repeat categories and numbers, but do not always provide the range of grammar. That helps a script reveal itself. Part of the problem is damage, variation, and the sheer age of the system. The result is a strange half-knowledge. We are not blind. We can say a great deal about tablet types, sign frequencies, numerical notations, and the contexts in which objects were found. scholars can propose structures and relationships, but reading, in the intimate sense, remains out of reach. This is where the real mystery becomes disciplined. It would be easy to fill the silence with whatever we want: a lost civilization, a warning, a secret history. But the silence is not permission to invent. It is an instruction to be patient. The signs do not become more meaningful because we project harder onto them. Proto-Elamite matters because it shows that writing can exist in the archaeological record without becoming a voice. The tablet can survive, the marks can survive, even the system's general function can be partly understood, and still the human sentence can remain locked away. Think about what that means. There were people trained to use this script. They made mistakes, learned conventions, corrected one another, and trusted the marks to carry meaning. They lived in a world where these signs were normal. Then, over time, the practice ended. The chain of teaching broke. The last person who could read a certain mark died, and no one after them knew that a door had closed. Not all endings are dramatic. Sometimes a civilization loses a script the way a room loses heat after sunset, gradually, then completely. Proto-Elamite is not alone in that darkness. Far to the east, in the cities of the Indus world, another system waits with thousands of tiny signs and no clear voice. The Indus civilization did not leave us pyramids, ziggurats, or royal tombs that shout a single ruler's name. It left cities: Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dholavira, streets laid with care, drains engineered with a discipline that still surprises visitors, weights, beads, craft, long-distance trade, standardized bricks and seals bearing animals and small signs. It was one of the great urban civilizations of the Bronze Age, spread across a vast region, and yet its writing remains unread. If it is writing. Even that sentence carries a debate. Many scholars treat the Indus signs as a script, likely connected to language. Others have questioned whether the brief inscriptions functioned in the same way as full writing systems elsewhere. The inscriptions are often short, appearing on seals, tablets, pottery, and other objects. We do not have long texts. We do not have a bilingual inscription. We do not have a known royal proclamation that repeats in a predictable formula. We do not have the kind of abundant narrative or administrative archive that helped unlock cuneiform. We have a civilization, but not its voice. This absence changes the way the Indus world feels in the modern imagination. The cities are physically present. Their streets can be walked, their wells and drains can be studied, their craft can be admired, but the inner names are missing. We do not know what they called their rulers, if rulers in the usual sense existed. We do not know their myths in their own words. We do not know the names of their cities as their inhabitants spoke them. We do not know what a child heard when elders explained the seal animals, the signs, the rituals, the floods, the ancestors. An unread script does not make a civilization empty. It makes us outsiders. The Indus signs are especially humbling because the material culture is so sophisticated. These were not people on the edge of complexity. They built cities with planning, craft, and standardization. They traded across regions. They lived within systems that must have required coordination. The signs may have belonged to identity, ownership, trade, administration, ritual, or some mixture we cannot yet separate. A tiny seal impression may have carried a whole world of social meaning. But without reading, every interpretation remains partly braced by absence. This is why the Indus script belongs in tonight's journey. It widens the question beyond Mesopotamia. The first writing on earth was not one road. It was a set of roads, some of which joined the highway of readable history, and some of which ended in fog. The Indus road did not fail because the civilization was simple. It failed us because the bridge of decipherment has not yet held. There is a tender frustration in that. The ruins are not hiding, the seals are not invisible, the signs are not gone. They are right there, small and neat, waiting in museums and storerooms and excavation reports. They have survived heat, burial, looting, flood, politics and time. But they have not yet survived translation. And across the sea, on an island of palaces, another script waits in a similar half-light. On Crete, the problem changes shape. The island gives us palaces, storerooms, painted walls, seal stones, ritual spaces, and tablets. It gives us scripts that look close enough to later Greek history to feel almost reachable. There is Cretan hieroglyphic. There is Linear A. Later, there is Linear B, which was deciphered in the 20th century and shown to record an early form of Greek. Linear B opened because enough pieces aligned. There were repeated signs, structured tablets, comparisons, brilliant pattern work, and the crucial fact that the underlying language turned out to be Greek. Once that door opened, the tablets spoke in a voice more administrative than romantic: sheep, tripods, oil, workers, offerings, lists. Again, the palace kept accounts. But Linear A remains unread. It is older than Linear B and associated with the Minoan world. Some signs look related to Linear B, but knowing the sound values of one system does not automatically solve the other. If the language behind Linear A is not Greek, then borrowing sound values may produce noise, partial hints, or misleading echoes. The script sits close to the readable world, yet not inside it. There is something almost painful about that closeness. A Linear A tablet does not feel as remote as a mark from another planet. It belongs to a Mediterranean world with ships, palaces, trade, craft, and neighbours whose histories we partly know. We can walk through the ruins of Knossos and Phaistos. We can imagine storerooms of oil and grain, courtyards, processions, workshops, and sea routes. The material world is vivid. The written voice is missing. This teaches another lesson about decipherment. Proximity is not enough. A script can stand beside a deciphered cousin and still resist. It can share shapes without sharing language. It can sit inside a well-excavated culture and still withhold grammar, names, hymns, warnings, jokes, and complaints. What did the Minoans say about themselves? What did their titles mean? What were their gods called in their own language? How did they name the sea, the harvest, the palace, the dead? We have later Greek stories about Minos, labyrinths, bulls, and a powerful island. But later stories are not the same as a culture speaking for itself. Linear A is not silent because it has nothing to say. It is silent because we do not yet know how to ask correctly. The island scripts show the difference between archaeology and voice. Archaeology can reveal buildings, trade, diet, disaster, craft, and movement. It can do astonishing work without a single sentence. But writing, when it opens, adds a different human texture. It gives names, it gives categories, it gives mistakes. It lets a dead administrator be tired, precise, worried, or dull. Dullness is precious in ancient history. It is proof that people lived normal days. The unread scripts deny us that normality. They leave us with silhouettes where biographies might have been. And then, back in Mesopotamia, the readable archive gives us something else, not only accounts, but memory stretched into myth. Lists of kings, reigns too long for ordinary history, a floodline, a world before the world we know. The Sumerian king list is one of those ancient texts that seems designed to trouble modern categories. It names cities. It names kings. It presents rule as something that descends from heaven, moves from city to city, and survives catastrophe. In its early sections, some reigns are impossibly long by ordinary human standards. Then comes a flood. After the flood, kingship descends again, and the scale of the reigns begins over time to feel more human. It is easy to mishandle a text like this. If we treat it as straightforward modern history, it breaks. If we dismiss it as nonsense, we lose what ancient memory is doing. The better approach is to let it be what it is, a political, mythic, historical, and theological construction from a world where those categories were not separated in the way. We separate them now. The king list is not the first writing. It comes later than the earliest clay records, but it belongs in this story because it shows what writing became able to preserve, not just transactions, but deep memory arranged into authority. It makes the past into a sequence. It says rule had an order. It says cities inherited destiny. It says there was a before and after the flood. That flood line matters. Flood memories appear in Mesopotamian literature in more than one form. They are not simple newspaper reports of one event, but neither are they meaningless fantasy. In a river world, flood was an ordinary danger and an extraordinary symbol. Water could bring life, erase fields, bury houses, and reset cities. A great flood story can hold social memory, theology, trauma, landscape, and political meaning at once. Writing made such memory more durable. It did not freeze it perfectly. Texts were copied, edited, transmitted, reworked. Scribes were not photocopiers. They were participants in tradition, but the written version could cross centuries in a way speech alone could not. This is where the first writing points beyond administration toward a world we still cannot fully understand. The clay records begin with goods and numbers. Later clay records hold kings who reign for spans. No historian can accept literally, yet no serious reader should ignore. The tablets carry a civilization's way of connecting power to time, city to cosmos, catastrophe to renewal. To read such text well, we need more than signs, we need humility. A modern reader may want the tablet to answer one question. Was it real? Was it literal? Was it symbolic? Ancient texts often refuse that neatness. They can preserve a memory and reshape it. They can legitimize a ruler and remember a disaster. They can be myth and history at the same time, not because people were confused, but because the past had social work to do. The unread scripts sharpen this humility. If we can misunderstand texts we can read, how much more careful must we be with texts we cannot? The first writing did not open a simple archive of facts. It opened a human archive, and humans are layered. To hear them across 5,000 years, we have to learn the slow craft of reading the dead. Decipherment is often told as a moment. A genius looks at a sign, sees the pattern, and a dead language suddenly speaks. Those moments exist and they are real, but most decipherment is slower than legend. It is accumulation, sign lists, copies, photographs, broken joins, bilingual clues if history has been generous, known names, repeated formulas, statistics, grammar, luck, and then more patience than romance usually admits. To read a dead script, scholars ask many small questions. How many signs are there? Do signs repeat in places where names might repeat? Are there word dividers? Are the inscriptions long enough to contain grammar? Do numbers behave differently from words? Are the signs tied to objects, seals, jars, tablets, monuments, or bodies? Is the language behind the script known, related to a known family, or isolated? Are there later texts that preserve names from the same world? Every answer narrows the dark. But not every darkness narrows enough. The Rosetta Stone helped unlock Egyptian hieroglyphs because it carried related text in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic, Linear B yielded because patterns, place names, and sign values eventually converged toward Greek. Cuneiform opened through inscriptions, repeated royal names, multilingual evidence, and the labour of many scholars over time. These successes can make decipherment look inevitable. It is not. Some scripts may remain unread because the surviving evidence is too short, too damaged, too isolated, or too detached from any known language. Some may need a discovery not yet made, a bilingual inscription buried under a field, a longer tablet in a storeroom, a labelled archive, a context that suddenly turns pattern into speech. Some may be partly solved by computational tools that compare sign order and frequency in ways no single eye could manage, but computation cannot conjure a lost language from nothing. It can sharpen questions. It still needs evidence. This is a useful correction for our age. We live among machines that seem to read everything. They translate menus through cameras. They transcribe voices. They predict words before we type them. It is tempting to imagine that an unread ancient script is only waiting for enough processing power. But a script is not just a puzzle grid. It is a social contract made by vanished people. Without enough examples, without the language, without context, even the smartest tool may only produce elegant guesses. That does not make the work hopeless. It makes it honest. Every new tablet matters. Every improved photograph matters. Every careful publication matters. A small sign variant can change a reading. A broken join can reunite a sentence. A site report can show that a tablet belonged to a storeroom rather than a shrine. Context can rescue meaning from speculation. The dead are not mute, they are distant. And distance can be crossed, but only one patient mark at a time. Return now to the museum drawer. The room is quiet. The tablet lies where we left it, a small brown survivor in a tray. Around it are other survivors, fragments, ceilings, broken corners, objects that once moved through living hands with living purposes. None of them knew they were ancient. None of them knew they would become evidence. They belonged to days as ordinary as ours. That may be the deepest lesson of the first writing. The beginning of history was not the beginning of human meaning. People loved, feared, counted, sang, buried, traded, and remembered long before writing. But writing changed the terms of survival. It let small pieces of a day cross the abyss. It let a rationalist outlive a kingdom. It let a school exercise outlive the school. It let a king's claim outlive the body that made it. It let a flood memory travel into another age. And still, so much remains closed. Some tablets can be read but not fully understood. Some signs can be counted but not spoken. Some scripts sit beside us like sealed runes. Proto-Elamite waits. The Indus signs wait. Linear A waits. Early tablets with damaged marks wait. The lost writing on perishable materials does not wait at all. It is gone, and we only feel the shape of its absence. This is not failure. It is the true scale of the human past. We know enough to be astonished. We do not know enough to be arrogant. Some future discovery may open one of these rooms. A bilingual inscription may come from a field no one has yet dug. A long Indus text may appear where only short seals were expected. A Proto-Elamite archive may yield a repeated pattern that changes everything, or the doors may remain closed for centuries, reminding every generation that the past is not obligated to become simple just because we want it badly. The first writing on Earth points to a world we still cannot understand in full, not a fantasy world. Not a world of impossible machines, a real human world made of grain, seals, kings, floodwater, offices, sheep, temples, ships and names, a world close enough to touch in clay, far enough that a single mark can still defeat us. That is why the tablet is beautiful, not because it answers every question, because it proves that someone was here before us, trying to make a moment last. The drawer slides in, the light narrows, the clay returns to darkness, still holding its marks. And somewhere inside those marks, a world is still waiting to be read.